In 1990, newspapers and broadcast outlets across North America reported that researchers at the University of Texas had identified the gene for alcoholism. This news was greeted with tremendous interest, and the major media waxed enthusiastic with pronouncements about the imminent end of alcoholism. In 5 years, scientists should have perfected a blood test for the gene to help spot children at risk. Soon after that, we would develop a drug to block that gene or control some form of alcoholism by altering the dopamine absorption. And eventually, with genetic engineering, we'd be able to eliminate, eradicate entirely this gene from the population. So that's the dream, right? We have the gene, we were born with it, it's not our fault, and we can get rid of it. We're good. The problem is that it wasn't true. Addiction is a complex topic. People get addicted to drugs, they get addicted to alcohol, they get addicted to tobacco. And then those are just the obvious ones. There's also less obvious addictions that people have. Validation, social media, gambling, food, all types of different things that you're like, how is that even addictive? This book that I've read called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate, which I get a lot of the information in this video from. He talks about how he has an addiction to pretty much buying classical vinyls, and he would spend thousands of dollars a month not able to stop his addiction to this, not able to stop and control himself from buying these vinyls and listening to classical music. The addiction mechanism actually kind of works the same for all sorts of different behaviors, not just alcohol, not just drugs, not just tobacco. It works for every other type of addiction that we have. Like some people are addicted to work. Some people are addicted to Candy Crush, like my father being one of them, actually. But what this Texas group had actually located was a variation of the dopamine receptor gene. And this gene appears to be more common in alcoholics than non-alcoholics. But here's the thing, so we've discussed a lot before about the insecure attachment styles and how this is developed through our birthing process, as well as how we are raised growing up as infants, right? So we have this attachment to a mother character, and if we live in a stressed environment, so for example, if you are being adopted, your mother is by definition going to be stressed, right? She either got pregnant by accident, there's stress, there's addiction as well. There's some sort of stress going on. That's where a lot of people get these studies from. So this thing about like the gene for alcoholism being a real thing is just not true, and a lot of it comes down to the trauma that we experience either in the womb or outside of the womb, like when we're newborn babies. So if we don't have a proper mother figure, we're going to develop a way of coping with stress in an unhealthy way. So we're going to be more susceptible to addiction. Now, for example here, so they found that women who were pregnant at the time of the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks and who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of witnessing the disaster, passed on their stress effects to their newborns. At 1 year of age, these infants had an abnormal amount of the stress hormone cortisol. It's been demonstrated that both animals and humans who experience the stress of their mothers during pregnancy are more likely to have disturbed stress control mechanisms long after birth, creating a risk factor for addiction. Essentially, this means that as infants, we develop a way that we don't understand how to deal with stress or trauma, and then we're more likely to turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to kind of deal with that because our body isn't capable of regulating it itself. It involves a lot of stuff around how we're brought up, or a lot around how we were brought up in the womb and like what the stress of our family life was like. But absolutely what alcoholism is not is genetic. It's not in your genes. There's no gene to say that you're going to be an alcoholic. So the interesting thing about this though is you're still an addict, right? You're an addict either because you have a genetic predisposition to do it, so like in your genes you have addiction traits, or some stuff happened to you before you were even born that made you more susceptible to being an addict. So what's the difference, right? It's still something that this happened before I had any conscious awareness. So why does it even matter? It's a good question. The difference is it comes down to our beliefs about stuff, right? So if we think genetically I'm an addict, then you're going to give yourself a lot more leeway into hey, I'm stuck here, I can't help it. I was born like this. Or if you say that, hey, some things that happened to me, they make me more susceptible to this, but it's not in my genes, meaning I won't be passing this on to my children. This generational trauma thing come from an abusive household, and then we in turn end up in an abusive household. and then we have our children, and they also end up in an abusive household, right? So it just kind of spirals down, right? And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse with each passing thing. And a very interesting thing that I saw from Dwayne Onfroy recently, with the father of XXXTentacion, who I have a lot of respect for, as you guys know, he posted this thing recently that on his Instagram that said like, hey, I grew up, my father left me when I was 8 years old or something like that, you know? So I didn't have a father in my life. And then due to going to prison, I left my kids for 8.5 years when they were around 10 years old. And so my children didn't have anyone in their life. And then XXXTentacion, Jose Onfroy, he ends up getting murdered before his son is even born. The spiral keeps perpetuating, which is a super depressing and super interesting thing to happen. So like his son is growing up without a father, and then he's got to raise himself like dealing with that situation. So it's just all around, it's kind of like an unfortunate thing, but there's no genetic thing in there that said Jose needed to kind of like, he was going to go through all this like traumatic experience and blah, 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 and like have an abusive kind of early life experiences, right? Genetically, that wasn't going to happen. It's what happens with the situation that we get put into in terms of like traumatic experiences as children. So Gekyum has to live a life without his father, but like I think what X did was he was actually able to kind of stop the cycle by providing his family with the means to be able to live a good life. So my hope is that this generational trauma, it stopped at X. It starts again, and the lack of trauma starts with Gekyum and the family of Gekyum. That's what I'm hoping. It's just kind of a thing that we like to have it as like, hey, it's genetic, so like it's not our fault, right? If you have this genetic propensity for alcoholism, it's not your fault. But the thing is, now there's something that you can do about it. Now you can say, hey, I'm not genetically inclined to this, but I am inclined to this, right? So you can keep an eye on it. And me, for example, I have a very strong inclination to addiction. So for example, this t-shirt that I have right now, I went to the store, bought it, I thought it fit good, and then I went to the store and I bought as many of them as I possibly could. And I said, hey, I'm going to only wear blue t-shirts from now on because I'm just like that, you know? And so it's not the end of the world, but it's just something that I have to keep an eye on, like, oh right, like I can fall into this pretty quickly. At least my kids, I'm aware of this, and I can try to mold the environment that they're in so that they don't have this like propensity for addiction or whatever it is. And if they do, we know some things to help with that. But how do we break the cycle of addiction, right? That's the question. That wasn't the topic of this video. We were just trying to answer the one question, is alcoholism genetic? That's what we're trying to answer today, which we did. The situation in terms of how do we break through the cycle of alcoholism, how do we actually stop being an addict, this is something that I covered on a different video, which you can see. I made this video on my 1 year sober anniversary. I'm actually about to be approaching 4 years sober very soon. And so I'll probably make another video in that realm, but that's a start. This is just kind of what I did to overcome like drinking and stop drinking. But I would also recommend Gabor Mate's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, to get a better understanding of addiction, the addiction process, and kind of how it affects our lives and the people around us' lives. And at the very least, it'll give you a lot of empathy for people on the street who have like a heroin or a crack addiction. You're like, oh damn, like a lot of them have gone through some pretty horrible stuff and they don't know how to cope with it. So I'll leave it here. If this is something that you liked, give it a like. If you want to talk about your situation with alcohol or addiction in the comments, feel free. Any comment helps with the algorithm. As well, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and if you want to work with me personally, either through helping with addiction, or if you want to work with me in terms of helping get over addiction, anxiety, social anxiety, or help with communication, confidence, mindset stuff, you can apply on my website, jeffreymar.com. So besides that, hope you have a great day. Hope you stay sober, drink some water. Take care.